Former President Trump's aggressive stance on trade policy has returned to the spotlight, with his recent announcements targeting multiple trading partners. The plan includes a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada, with a reduced 10% rate on Canadian energy products. A sweeping 10% tariff has been imposed on Chinese imports, with potential expansions to include European Union and Japanese goods. Let's break down what this means for your wallet. Despite claims that foreign nations will bear the burden, economic experts emphasize that American consumers ultimately foot the bill for these tariffs. During Trump's previous administration, similar policies cost Americans approximately $80 billion, and when questioned about future costs, Trump admitted, "I can't guarantee anything." The administration must work within specific legal frameworks. Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act, National Security Concerns. Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act, Unfair Trade Practices. The 1930 Tariff Act, Retaliatory Measures. To circumvent these limitations, the White House has linked various tariffs to national emergencies. The Mexican and Canadian tariffs are being justified through border security and illegal immigration. For China, the administration cites concerns over fentanyl precursor chemicals entering the U.S. While promoted as an economic turning point to improve America's position, many economists express serious concerns. The fundamental issue remains. Tariffs function as a tax, despite messaging suggesting otherwise. When goods enter our country, it's American businesses and consumers who absorb these additional costs. Stay with us as we continue to monitor these developing trade tensions and their impact on your daily expenses. Back to you in the studio. In a development that directly impacts American consumers' wallets, the reality of tariffs is becoming increasingly clear. It's not foreign countries, but U.S. citizens who ultimately foot the bill. Let's examine this through the example of avocados. About 90% of America's avocados come from Mexico, representing a $2.7 billion trade in 2024. When a 25% tariff is applied, retailers like Walmart pass the cost to consumers. That dollar avocado? It now costs $1.25, and that's just one product among thousands. While the White House frames new proposed tariffs around national security and immigration concerns, former President Trump's focus reveals a different priority: addressing America's massive trade deficit. The numbers are stark. In 2024, America's overall trade deficit hit $98.4 billion, with the goods trade deficit reaching $1.2 trillion. This means the United States is importing $1.2 trillion more in goods than it's exporting, a situation many economists view as unsustainable. With China alone, the U.S. purchased $295.4 billion more goods than what China bought from the United States in 2024. Similar patterns exist with the EU, Mexico, Vietnam, Ireland, Germany, Taiwan, South Korea, and Canada. Trump's approach was clear in his meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister. "We have a trade deficit with Japan of over $100 billion, but we're going to work that out. We can do it just on oil and gas." The core concern isn't just about numbers. It's about American jobs, industrial capacity, and national security. When a country imports more than it exports, it can lead to domestic job losses and increased dependence on foreign manufacturers. The COVID-19 pandemic illustrated the risks when global supply chains froze. This economic dynamic gives foreign countries significant leverage in negotiations, as the United States increasingly relies on imported goods. The question now facing policymakers is how to balance consumer costs against long-term economic independence. Breaking news on America's economic battlefront. Former President Trump's aggressive trade strategy continues to spark heated debate among experts and consumers alike. Let's dive into why this matters to your wallet and the nation's future. America faced a $400 billion trade deficit with China. That's like writing a check for nearly $500 billion to another country. Trump's solution? A 10% tariff on Chinese goods, affecting everything from video games to smartphones. These tariffs work like a tax at the border, making foreign products more expensive. The idea is simple: make Chinese products cost more, and Americans will buy American-made goods instead. But here's the catch. When retailers have to pay more for imported products, consumers foot the bill. Take Mexican avocados. With a 25% tariff, your guacamole got more expensive. And it's not just about avocados. We're talking about cars, computers, and everyday items. Consider this. 18 out of every 100 cars sold in America come from Mexico. With Trump's 25% tariff, that Ford or GM vehicle you've been eyeing has become significantly more expensive, even though it's an American brand. The Wall Street Journal called this the dumbest trade war in history. When companies face these tariffs, they often don't move production to America as hoped. Instead, they simply find the next cheapest country to manufacture their goods. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve struggles with inflation, and American families feel the pinch at the grocery store. Critics argue that adding tariffs on top of existing price pressures is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Is this America First policy actually putting American wallets last? As this debate continues to shape our economy, stay tuned for more updates on how these trade policies affect your bottom line. In a development reshaping global trade dynamics, American companies are playing manufacturing musical chairs. Instead of bringing production back to U.S. soil as intended, they're relocating to other low-cost countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico. This shift reveals a challenge in America's tariff strategy. Despite being one of the world's wealthiest nations with strong labor rights and competitive wages, companies consistently seek cheaper manufacturing alternatives abroad. It's basic business mathematics that's difficult for policymakers to counter. The situation has led to tensions with longtime allies. Canadian sports fans were recently heard booing the American national anthem, indicating souring relations between these traditionally close partners. The situation with Australia is equally concerning. Despite shared military commitments and historically warm relations, the sudden implementation of a 25% tariff on Australian steel has caused diplomatic strain. The repercussions extend beyond economic impacts. BRICS nations' pressure from American economic policies has accelerated their development of alternative payment systems, potentially threatening the U.S. dollar's dominance in global trade. The current administration's approach has targeted America's largest trading partners simultaneously: Canada and Mexico, biggest export markets; China, largest supplier; and key allies in the EU and Japan. While these nations may not directly challenge American authority, they recognize America's trade deficit, a vulnerability that makes the U.S. dependent on foreign goods. As economists question this hardline approach, a familiar adage comes to mind: don't bite the hand that feeds you. The wisdom of pursuing punitive tariffs against the global trading community is being debated, especially considering the potential long-term diplomatic and economic consequences. Will this aggressive trade strategy ultimately benefit America? Or is it the dumbest trade war in history? In today's analysis, we examine the consequences of America's trade policies, particularly regarding China's strategic response and its impact on global economic relationships. Economic experts are concerned about China's potential retaliatory measures against U.S. tariffs. Of particular worry is China's dominance in rare earth minerals, critical for American technology manufacturing. Beijing could leverage this by restricting exports, potentially crippling segments of U.S. tech production. Another concern involves China's position as a major holder of U.S. Treasury bonds. Any reduction in Chinese purchases could weaken the U.S. dollar and increase American debt servicing costs. U.S. tariff policies may be pushing other nations closer to China. The European Union, Japan, and Australia have strengthened their trade relationships with Beijing, showing how American protectionist measures could backfire. China has shown adaptability in using trade relationships to expand its influence. The risk here is that America's attempt to assert dominance through tariffs might actually diminish its global economic influence, says Dr. Thomas Richardson, senior economist at Global Trade Analytics. We're seeing a shift in trade patterns that could have long-lasting implications. The situation has created a paradox. Measures intended to protect American interests might instead accelerate the rise of alternative trade partnerships that exclude the U.S. This comes as global supply chains undergo restructuring. Market analysts point to increased cooperation between Asian economies and European partners as evidence of this shift. Trade volumes between these regions have grown substantially. Economists worldwide are monitoring several key indicators: changes in supply chain configurations, currency exchange rates, and regional trade agreements. These developments raise questions about the effectiveness of U.S. trade policies and their impact on American economic interests.